IPS Emax Press Multi is well, for the first time a polychromatic ingot material which is designed for the pressing technology which we know from all the existing IPS Emax Press ingot system. It's actually an amazing development if you think about that. You have now an ingot material with polychromatic characteristics, but not only that, you also have dentin opacity and enamel translucency in one ingot, and that really makes it spectacular to me.
It's really a game changer in terms of how we can deliver glass ceramic materials in a very simple approach to gain a very highly aesthetic outcome. In traditional processing, it would require ceramists multiple firings, multiple hours to create a smile design using layered ceramic, where now that smile design can be achieved through a simple staining technique.
Even with my first experiences I see that we can easily indicate and use it for veneers, crowns, as well as posterior and anterior area especially. Spruing IPS Emax Press Multi is first of all, it's different to any other common spruing technique, and I think it's once you've practiced it and understand the principle of it, it's very easy to use in the daily workflow.
The strength of the multi really mirrors the 400 megapascal flexural strength that we have with all of the other Emax materials. It's not a significant change in the physical property of the material, which we've always known to be very good. What it does though is it creates a more aesthetic outcome with new shading within that same chemistry of material.
Multi will blend in perfectly and will give us, for the first time actually, it's almost revolutionary. We have high strength, but also at the same time we have high aesthetic.
Introducing IPS Emax Press Multi, the world's first polychromatic press ingot. Thank you for joining us today. Please welcome Mr. Jeff Smith, Associate Manager of Technical Services with Ivoclar Vivadent, as he presents IPS Emax Press Multi.
Hi, I'm Jeff Smith, the Associate Manager of Technical Services for Ivoclar Vivadent, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar featuring IPS Emax Press Multi. IPS Emax Press Multi represents a true innovation in monolithic aesthetics. This polychromatic lithium disilicate ingot features a flexural strength of 400 megapascal and lifelike aesthetics due to its shade gradient from the dentin to the incisal area of the restoration. As you begin working with IPS Emax Press Multi, there are several accessory items you will need in order to ensure a favorable outcome. The first of these accessory items are the IPS Multi investment ring base and the associated IPS Multi sprue guide. These two items, when used in conjunction with one another, will ensure the proper positioning of the waxed restoration within the investment ring. When pressing the IPS Emax Press Multi ingot into the investment mold, you would need to use the IPS Multi one-way plunger. This is a special disposable plunger which is used in conjunction with the aluminum oxide plunger for delivering the material into the mold. Lastly, you will need the IPS Emax Multi wax pattern. This is a specially designed wax pattern which represents the sprue assembly for multi-pressing. It is available in two shapes, Shape A, which is green in color, and Shape B, which is pink in color. The choice of whether to use Shape A or Shape B is dependent on the size of the tooth preparation and will be described in detail in further slides. It's only by using these special prefabricated wax patterns that we can ensure the correct pressing of the Emax Press Multi ingot. For the majority of restorations with an average prep size, the IPS multi-wax pattern shape A will be used. However, for restorations with very narrow preparations such as mandibular incisors, multi-wax pattern shape B must be used. This sprue is specially designed to slow the flow of ceramic, creating less force on the prep during the pressing process. Failure to use shape B on small, delicate crown preparations could result in breakage of the investment prep during pressing and a loss of the restoration. Unlike traditional pressing, which involves a vertical delivery of the material, Press Multi is accomplished by pressing in a horizontal flow path. To accomplish this, wax pattern A or B is attached to either the mesial or the distal axial wall of the restoration. When attaching the sprue to the restoration, there are a few basic rules of alignment which should be followed. First, it is important to align the restoration so that it is centered on the IPS multi-wax pattern sprue. This will ensure the proper gradient is achieved with a proper amount of incisal to dentin translucency. Additionally, the multi-wax pattern has a tapered profile. It's important to ensure that the narrow portion of the taper is aligned with the incisal edge of the restoration and the wider portion aligned with the cervical area. When pressing Emax Press Multi, the sprue may be attached to either the mesial or the distal surface of the restoration. It is critical, however, that the flow path is not directed immediately toward the die. The flow path should be along the labial surface of the restoration in order to accomplish this. Failure to follow this rule could put too much lateral stress on the prep of investment within the mold and could result in breakage. Once you're satisfied with positioning of the sprue, the gap between the restoration and the sprue should be closed with a small amount of modeling wax. Please take care to avoid flaring or thickening the attachment point, as this would lead to an unfavorable flow path. Take care when sealing the cervical portion of the sprue to avoid damage to the restoration margin. Additional care should be taken when designing the sprue assembly to ensure that no sharp projection of investment will exist after the burnout of the wax. This would represent an area of investment that could potentially break off and be carried into the mold, thereby compromising the integrity of the restoration. To accomplish this, a slight rounding of the IPS multi-wax pattern is acceptable. When reviewing all of the basic spruing principles we've discussed so far, the single most important concept is to place the IPS multi-wax pattern in a way that the flow path of the ceramic is not pointed directly at the die, as this could cause catastrophic failure within the mold. In the following slides, we'll examine the proper spruing techniques for a variety of common dental laboratory restorations. The first of these restorations will be an anterior restoration, which is sprued with the IPS multi-wax pattern A. In this example, wax pattern A is attached in such a way that the tapered portion of the sprue is attached to the incisal of the restoration, the sprue is centered on the facial surface of the restoration, and the flow path is down the labial wall. When satisfied that the proper positioning has been achieved, we will close the gap with a small amount of wax. In the case of restorations with a more delicate die, the multi-wax pattern form B is used. As we can see in this slide, the little ridges on form B act as miniature speed bumps to flow the ceramic more slowly into the mold, thereby creating less lateral force on the preparation. The alignment of the sprue in this case is identical to that we had with form A. The attachment point is then sealed with a small amount of wax. In the case of a veneer restoration, the attachment of the sprue is very similar to that of a crown. The wax pattern form A is attached, lining it with the center of the restoration, just as it is with a single crown. The taper portion of the sprue is attached toward the incisal edge, and the flow path is down the labial wall. Never attach the sprue to the facial aspect of the restoration. Although there is more axial wall space here for attaching the sprue, the flow path would be inappropriate to keep the stratification of the materials consistent. When spruing posterior restorations, the basic rules that apply to anteriors still apply in this case. The sprue is aligned with the labial portion of the axial wall. The wax pattern is centered on the sprue, and the long axes are aligned. As in anterior restorations, once the alignment is confirmed, the gap is closed with a small amount of wax. The same basic screwing concepts that apply to the premolar also apply to the molar. Please note that although the clinical crown height of posterior restorations is typically shorter than those in the anterior, the restoration is still centered on the sprue with the long axes aligned. As with all other restoration types, when we close the gap with modeling wax, we take care not to flare or thicken the attachment point. A relatively new type of restoration in many dental laboratories is that of a hybrid abutment crown. You will notice in this example that despite the small profile of the preparation of investment, multi-wax pattern form A was used due to the thick area of labial wax which will support the flow path of the ceramic. The wax pattern is specifically aligned with this labial wall, the wax pattern is centered on the sprue, and the gap is closed with a small amount of wax. Once the wax ups have all been attached to the IPS multi-wax pattern, the next step is to prepare the sprue base to receive the wax pattern. The IPS multi sprue base is a special sprue base with 4 slots designed to receive the wax sprues. After determining how many patterns will be attached to the sprue base, any additional slots must be filled with wax. It is important to slightly overfill these slots to ensure the ingot can fully seat into place in the sprue chamber. When placing the IPS multi-wax pattern in the sprue base, it is important that the narrow portion of the taper is facing downward. This will place the incisal edge or occlusal surface of the restoration down, which will allow the enamel portion of the ingot to flow directly into this area. The proper positioning of the sprue assembly is verified using the IPS multi-investment sprue base and sprue guide. When correctly positioned, the wax pattern should be to the outer portion of the sprue guide, ensuring at least 3 millimeters of investment will be maintained between the sprue base and the restoration. When incorrectly positioned with the restoration too close to the sprue base, not maintaining at least 3 millimeters, this could result in a thin ridge of investment that could break off during pressing and be carried into the mold. A unique feature of IPS Emax Press Multi is the ability to adjust the sprue position to control the incisal translucency. Here we see the neutral position where the top of the sprue is aligned with the top of the IPS Emax Press Multi sprue base. If we want to increase the translucency, this is accomplished by moving the sprue lower on the sprue base to allow more incisal material to flow into the restoration. In order to accommodate this, it's necessary to modify slightly the IPS multi sprue by cutting a notch on the incisal portion of the sprue so it can be shifted lower on the sprue base. When making this adjustment to the sprue, it is recommended not to go more than 2 millimeters lower on the sprue base. Regardless of sprue type, restoration type, or vertical position on the sprue base, it's always critical to double check the position using the IPS sprue guide. After you're completely satisfied with the position of the wax patterns and the amount of vertical development of translucency, at that point it's important to close the sprue gap with a small amount of modeling wax. Just like when attaching the sprue to the wax pattern, it's critical not to add any flaring or thickening at the point of attachment. We are now ready to begin the investing process. Prior to assembling the silicone ring and pouring the investment, it's recommended to vibrate a little bit of investment into the occlusal surface of posterior restorations, and in the case of a hybrid abutment crown, into the screw channel. Care should also be taken for filling up the internal surface of the crown such that no investment bubbles are included, which would result in nodules in the final pressing, which would be difficult to remove. At this point, the 200-gram silicone ring is assembled onto the sprue base, and the cases continue to be invested as normal. Once the silicone ring is completely filled, the 200-gram IPS ring gauge is applied to the ring, and the investment is allowed to set for the appropriate amount of time. After the appropriate bench setting time, the IPS ring gauge is removed, and the investment is pushed from the silicone ring. The investment is then removed from the ring base using a turning movement. Preheating is accomplished using the recommended temperatures for press vest or press vest speed. As with any Emax pressing, only the ring goes into the burnout furnace. Do not preheat the plunger or the ingots. The preheating strategies for both IPS press vest and IPS press vest speed are clearly outlined in the Instruction for Use Manual for IPS Emax Press. In order to ensure proper pressing of Press Multi ingots, the Programmat EP3000, EP5000, EP3010, or EP5010 must be used. The most current software for these furnaces can be downloaded by visiting ivaclarvivident.com. This program will contain the appropriate processing parameters for the multi-pressing. Prior to the end of the preheating cycle, you should prepare the multi-ingot, the one-way plunger, and the ALOX plunger so they are available and ready for use. The investment ring is loaded by first placing the Emax multi-ingot with the imprinted side with the shade designation facing up. This provides two clear benefits. Number one, with the imprinting up, we can verify the shade of the ingot selected is appropriate, and in addition, by loading in this fashion, the incisal portion of the ingot is always facing toward the incisal portion of the restoration, and vice versa, for appropriate pressing of the layers of material into the mold. After placing the multi-ingot into the ring, the next step is to place the one-way plunger, which will be followed by the ALOX plunger. Once the investment ring has been prepared, it's placed in the press furnace, the Press Multi program is selected, and the start button is depressed. The program will now run automatically, and an audible tone will be the end of the press cycle. Once the press cycle is completed, remove the ring from the furnace and allow it to cool to room temperature normally. After the ring has been appropriately cooled, the next step is to perform the divesting process. This process begins by measuring 30 millimeters from the bottom of the investment ring and separating at this point with a separating disc. With a standard lab knife, the ring can then be pried apart at this predetermined breaking point. The divesting process continues by blasting with glass beads at low pressure, about 4 bar or 58 psi, until the objects become visible. It's important to respect the blasting pressure, as pressures above 4 bar could cause damage to thin areas of the restoration. Once sufficient investment has been removed to accommodate direct blasting at the restorations, we should reduce the pressure down to 2 bar or 29 psi for the complete divesting of the Emax Press Multi objects. After divesting, the reaction layer is removed by immersion in Invex liquid for a maximum of 30 minutes, followed by blasting with 100 micron aluminum oxide at very low pressure, approximately 1 bar. After the reaction layer has been completely removed, the restorations are separated from the screws, and finishing is accomplished using standard techniques. For completing the restorations, the staining technique is the primary indication, as this will provide the utmost in efficiency for the laboratory. It should be remembered, however, that on special cases where aesthetics are of the utmost importance, the cutback technique can be employed to improve aesthetics on a case-to-case basis. If the staining technique is to be used, the parameters for performing the firing processes are the same for any other Emax product. The amount of stain applied in this step is typically very minimal and should be only used to enhance the outstanding aesthetics already achieved through the pressing process. Once the staining and glazing operations are completed, the IPS Emax Press Multi restorations exhibit a lifelike aesthetic rivaling those of layered restorations. Even when viewed in transmitted light, the multi-restoration takes on a vitality never before achievable in a monolithic restoration. I would like to thank you for your participation in this webinar. For more details on the processing of IPS Emax Press Multi restorations, please refer to the Press Monolithic Solutions IFU, which is available for download at www.ivaclarvivident.com.